Welcome to Being Curious podcast show with Counselling Reflections, a podcast where we dive deep into the human experience, uncovering stories of resilience and triumph. We are proudly supported by Moskin, a UK-based skincare line infused with sea moss.
Good morning, Sam. Thank you for agreeing to be on Being Curious with Counselling Reflections. I have known you, I think, for nearly over 20 years.
That's so what age now, right?
I think it's about 20 years. And I'm so excited for listeners to listen to you because I have been inspired by you and your growth and your wisdom. And I just think, the work that you're doing. But for those of us for those out there who don't know anything about you, tell me your story.
My story?
Yeah.
It's a big, long one. First of all, thank you, because it's absolutely a pleasure to be here, and you're one of the huge inspirations in my life, honestly, so thank you. It means a lot to be here. My story, where do I even begin? My story in terms of, profession, dates back in the 20 years that I've known you. So I started out in social work, specifically around child protection. And my interest in that was probably really, and it still is, understanding not what the behaviour is and what's going on, is to understand the why. And that's been an underpinning of everything. So working in child protection, first in children's homes, and then creating teams where we're doing outreach and a number of different work with the families and stuff. That has been the story that's kind of been the golden thread throughout everything. So then started specialising in mental health and parenting probably about 10 years later. Done all of that throughout local authorities, and then after working for some agencies and stuff alongside, found for me that my values no longer kind of worked within the organisation I was working within the time. And so probably like a marriage, you stay a bit longer than you're supposed to if it doesn't work, and all sorts of negative things can be said, but there's always this learning that comes out of it. And so for me, that started what is now the Life Coaching Therapy Centre, where I do life coaching, specifically for people who are struggling with just feeling really stagnant and probably describe themselves as feeling stuck, stagnant, lacking confidence, struggling with anxiety and all those sorts of things that come with that.
Can I just pull you back a bit, because I know that you started through work, and I often realise that people come to a place of work, but how did you get to the place where you decided to go into social work? What was it about your life beforehand, if you don't mind sharing?
I absolutely don't mind sharing. I'm laughing because I fell into it reluctantly.
Did you?
I did. So my story in terms of that is I was working in business administration for a security company, an American company. It was fabulous. It was all over the UK. And I used to look after, I think it was at the time, like 400 different sites. And I would sort out what they called site instructions, so to run the buildings. And then I had my son, took maternity leave for 3 years with him, and really enjoyed that. And somewhere in my mind, I was like, absolutely not, can I go back to that? There was nothing about my being I wanted to work in an office like a robot anymore. And so my mum encouraged me, because she was a practice teacher in social work for ladies who were struggling from domestic violence. So in my trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I was doing lots of different courses. And then I went and done some work in the refuge she was working in as a play worker. And I decided strongly then, I don't want to be a social worker, but I want to do something in this field. I like working with people, right? And then I was like, despite that, I need the qualifications, because that's how I was raised. Go and get the qualifications and then figure it out. So I started to study social work. And then through that, it was actually through my placements, I was like, okay, I enjoy some of this. There's something in here. I'm not quite sure what it is, but there's something in this. And for me, what I now know is it was very much about hearing people's story, again, connecting to the why we fall into these situations, and really like being part of that journey through.
What inspired you then into becoming a coach and wanting to help parents in particular? What was it about the whys that kind of drew you to being curious about whys?
I have fundamentally always been curious.
Have you?
Fundamentally always been curious to the point of driving my parents absolutely bananas. Always been curious, always asked questions, always.
What type of questions did you ask?
I had no filter. I had no filter. It was always why. Why are they behaving like that? Why do they talk to them? Why are they talking to you like that? Why are we doing this? You know, it's always why. Even if I got told off, I'd always asking why. You know, everything was why. And so that used to, obviously, you can imagine if a parent's telling you should do something or not do something, and you always ask why, that probably drove them mad. And still, you know, to this day, my parents still say that. But I've always wanted to know why. I've just been captured and really, I just always want to know why.
Do you know, I'm listening to you and you sound like me, because I would ask my grandmother, you know, about contraception, and my grandmother would look at me and say, Canada? Well, why you ask that question? Because I think there's something about being curious, just by nature, that, you know, my auntie used to cut up my books because I would want to read. So I can understand, I can relate to that why part. How has that helped you kind of with the work that you're doing with families and individuals, that why part? What is it about the why? I wonder if clients know, or potential clients know why, or are they coming for you to answer the why for them?
There's a bit of both. Some of them feel like they know strongly why, and then I guess in part of doing the work, we figure out actually what the why was for them. When you dig a bit deeper and ask more whys, there's actually a deeper reason to that. But interestingly, what I'm hearing more and more from my clients also ask me is, or when I ask them why, they're like, I've never really thought about that. So there's a bit of some of them wanting to know why themselves, to try and figure out why they're in the situations they're in, or why they're feeling what they're in, or what they're experiencing. But for lots of them, they haven't actually asked the question. And so to be asked why for the first time in itself is like a really powerful thing.
And then how did it work in business, in working for an organisation like social services? Did the why matter then? Or did they expect you to get on with it?
Both. I think there is working for social services, but I think it's one of those things that age teaches us, right? In any organisation, there's a remit to which they want you to work within, right? And so I think in social work, or in that kind of arena, there was a certain amount of curiosity to understand why, to help kind of make the next shift or make that change or whatever's necessary. But it's always a fixed why in that arena, isn't it? It's got to fit in this box, and if it doesn't fit within this box, then it's not necessarily for us to do the work, for argument's sake. If the argument's sake, in my experience, if it was an issue around the child's behaviour or the parents, or an issue or something like that, you want to know why, to get to the root of it enough to kind of make some shift. It's very much about this kind of end result for them, especially when you're thinking about child protection, because there are risks involved, so you need to understand why to prevent it. But outside of that, it's very different. And I think how I generally worked with people then, and to continue to do now, is go beyond that.
You go beyond that, and what do you mean by that? What does that look like? I
think it's one thing to say, if I stay with social work for a moment, is to think, if a child is misbehaving, for me and how I think about the world, is that a child's behaviour is kind of indicative, regardless of it's good or bad behaviour, it's indicative of their experience up until. And so if we're thinking about that in relation to parenting, and thinking for the most part, for most children, parents are going to be their first influence. So a lot of the child's why is based on the parents. If a child's misbehaving, there may be something going on around that system, if you like, of home. But it may not be that. It might be so many other things. So understanding why can help us build a picture. But if we're thinking a little bit deeper, we might ask parents questions as to why do they do their parenting the way they do it? Where did they learn that from? What are they trying to learn? What are they trying to instill in their children? What is it about their experience that they're trying to do these things? They're doing it in a particular way. And for most of us, it will be a mix of, I was parented like this and I've taken it, this is what I know. Or it will be, I was parented like this, didn't like it, and so I'm trying to do this other thing. And so when you start asking questions underneath that of why, what impact did it have on you? Why are you making these decisions? Why and why and why? initially it can feel grating, but if it's from the place of I'm trying to, and that's where I come from, is I'm trying to help you be the best version of what it is you're trying to accomplish, but it's having this other result for your child, it's having this other result for you, it's having this other result that we're concerned about if we're talking about child protection, then it's about understanding, is this effective in the way you want it to be?
Because I think there's something about kind of being curious and asking why. Because sometimes we don't have the space, parents don't have the space if they've got mental health or addiction issues,
Right.
or they're worrying about housing, or their child is acting out, and they are kind of looking at themselves, but they don't necessarily want to look too deeply. And depending on the child's age, most children take responsibility for the failings of the family system. Do you think when you was working in kind of more kind of social services arenas, do you think that you was able to do that deeper down work? And is that why you kind of set up your own organisations to deal with that, or to ask the whys, or spend more time with the whys?
100%, and that's, I guess, where I moved away from doing the social worker role but continue to work in social work. As a social worker, there's very much a focus on coordinating the pieces of work that happen, and that doesn't allow you necessarily to ask those questions more deeply and for a long time. And so working as a practitioner allowed me to do that very thing, to spend that time connecting to people. And sometimes it is those things, because you can imagine if you're just going into someone's home where you're asking them to come and meet with you in this very clinical space and you're asking questions like why, it in itself creates these barriers, which is different to just taking time to get to know somebody and having conversations, and the why becomes part of those conversations. It allows for something, it allows a relationship, it allows connection, it allows, again, the curiosity, if you like, in a way that doesn't feel like it's prodding or it's not invasive. It can just be, let's go on a journey of discovery together. You know, it's a very different kind of approach. And so because of that, yes, it did allow me to do that in social work. I was living in that space to do that, and I kind of took it whether it was an option or not, frankly. Certainly in working for myself, there's very much that. It's very much, I get the space to kind of look at it
in lots of different ways. What are the myths that parents have? Because I just know that I was so glad when my daughter got to a certain age, and I said to her, oh, how was I as a parent? And then she gave me the green light. Because up until that, I was a very much an anxious parent. What are the myths that other parents have when they come to you? What are they thinking is the problem, and what are you identifying as the problem?
There is no one remedy, there is no one recipe, there is no one thing most parents have. But what I would say is the common theme is fear. Fear around, am I getting this right? There isn't, you say this, it's a very cliche thing to say, but children do not come with a handbook, and every child is different, every parent's different. So to be going, and all of us, especially when you're doing parenting for the first time, it is just fear. That first time they scratch themselves, or, they get a cold or anything else, and there's always that question of, I'm giving them this thing, is it because that's the thing that's recommended, or this is the one that my friend used, or the one I used when I was growing up? It's all these things, but there's nothing to say, okay, tick that box, that one's right. You just have to figure it out along the way. And so it's that consistent, every new milestone, every new situation, every new everything is always doing it with that power of, I'm doing this thing and it feels right, it seems to be working, but is it actually right for my child? Am I doing the right thing?
Do you have a success story? Do you have a story that kind of encapsulates just what you said, of a family in terms of their experience or journey? Or what does that family might look like?
Do I have a success? I have thousands of them, honestly.
I know.
I have thousands.
What comes to mind?
What comes to mind is probably, there's two things, I guess, coming up for me, and I think that's very true of me anyway. More so doing parenting programs in parenting groups, when you have groups of parents who have nothing to do with each other, probably would never have met, but what they've come in the room for is this parenting information that's suddenly going to change everything, right? And so we start from that being the conversation as asking, why are you here? When you hear, that's the first conversation as a group. It's like, why are you here? And a lot of it is, I'm worried about my child. I'm worried about this. I'm worried about drugs and sex and rock and roll. I'm worried about their friends. I'm worried about our relationship. I'm worried. And just starting from that place into, why are we scared? What is it you're genuinely fearful of? Because you're trying to do this parenting thing and you're trying to be really effective and brilliant at it. But if you're doing anything, it doesn't matter what, and your foundation for that is fear, how effective are we really?
I wonder, it's hard not to be fearful. I'm just thinking of myself as a parent, and although it was a really long time ago, but I was scared of everything. I was scared, I was scared of the road. She was a single child, so I was scared of her, the influence that might be on the streets. And she wasn't a child that was, I didn't think, robust and be able to stand up for herself. So I kind of invited her to know everyone. The person that was truanting as well as the person that got A's, but also know your values. So, but I also think we got so much information from social media that tells us what a good parent is. So I also think that if I was a parent now, I would be scared of everything, because I'd be thinking, whoa, should I be doing that with my child? Because actually they're saying, social media is saying, and they've got millions of followers, that we should be doing this. And I'm not doing none of that.
Right. And this is it. And that's the lovely thing. And that's what makes so many thousands for me as success stories. It's not about getting it right or wrong.
It's not. But how have you navigated? Because you've got 5 children, haven't you?
I have got 5. One adult, I've successed in one, right? But the success story comes in, okay, let's take away the fear and let's think about what is it ultimately we want? What are our values? What is it we really want to install? And if we were doing it from not a place of fear, if we're doing it wholeheartedly, confidently, and understanding that life's going to happen, we're going to make mistakes, we can repair them, we can do those bits. If we weren't doing it from that place and we did it from this other place of, I want to enjoy parenting, I want a good, great communication, I want a good relationship, I want all those other things, what would we be doing differently? If we didn't have that fear, that goes for parenting as much as it does for life coaching. It's that same ethos, is that if we're not doing something from a place of fear and that didn't exist, how different would we be? How different would we act into those spaces? How differently would we communicate?
I think it would be really liberating, wouldn't it? I think in spite of fear, because I think there's a way of reframing fear, but I wonder if there's in spite of fear. So acknowledging that's how I feel, but just going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
And then trying to kind of relate to what that child wants and needs and their personality, which might not be, and that took a journey, and I think it helped me to do other youth work and child-focused things, to know that my child is not an extension or an appendage of me, that they're their own unique human being. And so I think that was helpful. But I still had fear.
And we have fear, as human beings generally, and fear has a purpose, it protects us from all sorts of things. But if we're functioning from a place of fear, it becomes this huge wall and barrier to what it is ultimately everything could be without it. And that's not to say we don't have the fear and do it anyway, because I think that's what I'm hearing from you. I think it's something about acknowledging the fear, but let's not make it a driver.
Yeah.
Let's not make.
Do you worry about different things? I wonder if parents, there's a collective thing that they might worry about their children's.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the personality of that child, that individual child. You could have really lovely child number 5 or 6 or 1 is a nightmare. I love you, but I can't go with you.
That's me. That's so me. But then you know what? It's that I think there's something about having the subsequent children, isn't it? I think with the first one, because it is the first, there's this fear. It's like the first of doing everything. There's a little bit of fear in there, and then by the time you read the second one, you're like, okay, I've got the gun. I've got a handle on this bit. I'm okay. And by the time we get, in my case, to the 5th, my 5th is just super confident. She's super everything, because I do less fear with her, and just allow her to just be herself and celebrate whoever that is, even if it feels like.
Yeah, that feels like a childhood that was back in the day. That you get to a place or subsequent place where you can just let go. I think my childhood, even though I had some experiences that were probably very negative for me, I had freedom. And I wonder how easy is it to kind of navigate a child's experience, as well as having to navigate all the technology that a child has or feels that they need to have.
I think, you know, and that's the new addition, if you like, to parenting, isn't it? It's technology and these wider experiences and things, and that creates a whole nother fear. But I know, just thinking about my own experience of being parented, my dad in particular just celebrated one, like asking the questions. I think all of that part of me being curious was very much from him. To this day, he's in his 80s and he's still like, he's got that childlike quality about being curious. But you also you encouraged me to ask those questions. And so I think probably, again, for people of our generation even, we had so many more freedoms, whether it's playing outside with your neighbours or all those sorts of things that came with it. But also there was a sense of community, and so there was a sense of, if I'm in my house and my children are playing outside, I'm roughly got a little bit of confidence that they're okay, and those things like that they're not part of society in the same way everywhere now. So there are these battles, but I think the coupling of that level of, I guess, isolation, for lack of a better phrase, of not feeling so confident to let our children be free in those ways, coupled with then this other thing that we have no control over, this technology, huge amounts of fear come with that, because at any given moment, our child could be exposed to God knows what and make the wrong choices or be influenced. And so I hear the fear and I acknowledge it. But it's like with everything, we as parents, I guess, have a responsibility to kind of educate ourselves and do the best we can with what we have, the best we can.
Do you know the bit that I worry about, and I know that I sound really judgmental, but I'm coming from a place of not having technology. I think I had word processor. I think, you know, so it really wasn't any technology as such. But what I do worry about when I'm on the bus or tube or travelling, when I see parents giving their child a laptop and they're like 2, 3, and the child knows how to swipe. And I think about the neuroscience of a growing mind, you know, and how it can impact. Do you worry? Are they those things that parents worry about now, or?
100%. Parents worry about it. And I think that's by nature. We just worry about everything. Parents just tend to worry about everything. That's our job, I suppose.
What are people worrying about at the moment? You know,
they're worried about that, what it is, what's going to be on that next swipe. Is it going to be the right thing? And I think, you know, when if we again look underneath the why, it's does the thing that they swipe next align to what it is we want to underpin and sell to our children as a way to live, as a way to think, as a way to speak, and all those other things we want to impart to our children. Is that next swipe going to have counter effect to that?
And then what guidance do you give, I suppose, parents on that? What should we be doing as parents? Because I think, you know, people are wanting kind of answers to things. On one hand, you're saying, trust your instincts, you know, we can help you, ask the whys, be curious. But on the other hand, I wonder if they come to your groups and the training that you offer and say, actually, I just want you to tell me what to do.
Oh, 100%. There's like they want the little magic pill or the magic answer that's going to take.
What is the magic pill at the moment, Sam?
The magic pill is education. The magic pill is education and understanding, because I think when we're most fearful is the things we don't know. So get to know. You don't know who.
But there's so much stuff. What would you invite parents to read then? Or because there's so much stuff and some of it sounds contradictory. On one hand, I've got more and more, I think I read somewhere, more and more parents who are Black, based in America, taking their kids out of school.
Yes.
So you'd have thought actually the place to be is in education, but not for all children. That is the safe place to kind of get the information. Yeah. Where should we get our information? What does that look like from your point of view?
Do you know what? It's a tricky one, and again, this is something that overlaps between when I'm working with somebody therapeutically or in coaching, as it does for parenting. And like, you're probably going to sound like I'm repeating myself on a broken record in this sense, but it still just comes back down to the same thing. What is it we want to teach our children? What are those fundamental values? And where can you get that information? Because if your values are more around nature, you're not going to find that by, you know, going somewhere that's very unnatural. It's just, that's the reality. So it's about finding the information based on what your values are. And, you know, this is, you know, the technology has these two sides to it, isn't it? Even if you are a 2-year-old who's looking at the internet or in a tablet or a phone or whatever it is, what is the purpose for them doing it? If it is for argument's sake, not that I'm advertising them, but we have a particular channel where children can watch numbers of different shows and they're going to learn colours and shapes and, how to read and write and all sorts of things. So in those ways, education and having technology is fantastic. Similarly, if we're choosing to homeschool, we want particular things to become the thing that we're educating our children around, not just through technology. What are the immersive experiences that children, and that's where children learn best. If I want my child to know things about, I don't know, hypothetically, if it was about my religion, for argument's sake, there's only so much reading we're going to do. I have to do that through the reading. I have to do that as part of who I am as a parent to them. I have to be embodying those things, but also shift them into those spaces. If I want them
I absolutely agree. And I think I came through the education lens, when I first went into kind of working with young people. It came from a place of education. But for some young people or people of colour, actually, the wider society is not inclusive of the storytelling, and education can often be, yes, absolutely beautiful. I wouldn't take it away, but it also can be quite self-limiting as a parent or as an individual. What do parents do about that? How do I ensure that, okay, I'm thinking about grandchildren. How do I ensure that they get the right stories or places to go?
Fill the gaps. I always say fill the gaps. There's always a gap. So the bits that we're concerned about our children not knowing, fill the gaps. I know for most of us, certainly in my experience anyway, I had the benefit of having both of my grandmothers when I was growing up as a child particularly. And so their stories, even hearing their stories about how they raised my parents or what their life experiences were so far removed from my own, but I've got a really deep sense of where they came from, what their experiences were, and therefore what I came from in myself. And for a child, to forget everything else we talked about so far, if a child has got a really rich sense of who they are in their own identity, they've always got that to come back to. And so some of the fears we have is because we probably feel like there isn't everything that they know, but actually as a parent, it's not our job to tell them everything. It takes a village, literally.
That adage is really wonderful, but I'm also aware that some of us have grown up without our parents. So I grew up in care, and I didn't have the privilege. Well, I did later on in life, but then I didn't have the privilege of understanding those stories. I didn't know the stories. There are still knowledges or gaps in my knowledge because I don't know those stories. So how do you speak to those parents who have been brought up in care or who've been adopted and have not had those storytellings, don't know their grandparents, are in beautiful families, but maybe also in families that don't know how to respond to their needs because they've been adopted, and so they are not typical of the family?
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, because in my family we did a lot of fostering and lots of adoption. So I've seen that firsthand. And so I would still invite parents who have had that as their experience to pick from that. And I say it like that on purpose. Pick from that the moments and the stories that meant something to them, that help embody the person they've then become. Because regardless of what our experiences have been in terms of being raised, there's something about who it is we essentially want to be in being the parent, right? Or being the person, if we're thinking again, we're moving away from parenting into coaching. Fundamentally, there's an idea of there's something I could be. Where in our history, where in our story did that come from in the first place? For someone who's been adopted or been fostered or been in care, or again, they didn't have those experiences, 99% of the time, they could probably call on that foster carer, that social worker, that neighbour, that teacher who instilled something. There was something about, again, those stories, that value, those bits.
So holding on to positive people in your life and holding on to the good, 100%. Or holding on to those positive memories.
Yeah.
That's so lovely. I think I can see it. For me, it was a lady called Wendy Stevens and Steve Stevens. They were my brother's foster parents. Right. Or I would say they were my brother's parents in many ways. And she used to take me out to dinner, and so I would go out to dinner and she would take me to things that I wouldn't think about. I don't think I'd have gone in my own family of origin. And she would buy my artwork. And so when I was feeling very creative, she was the person that kind of championed that I could be artistic, and that was my way of finding myself. So I think that's really beautiful, wanting to hold on to those stories. And sadly, many people haven't had positive stories to hold on to. So holding on to those moments, those moment-to-moment things seems really lovely.
It does, but then you know what? I also think about who comes through my practice, who are coming for parenting, who are coming from that space of not having even had those experiences for whatever reason. And then struggling again because of that bit of, for them, that feels at the time like it was missing. When they come through the door, there's that kind of thing that something's missing and they're not sure what it is. And so for them, it's about, what is the future story going to be? If we remove some of those blocks, some of those beliefs, some of those things about something being missing and it was full, what would be different? You know, what is it we're trying to walk into here? What is it that feel like is the thing that's stopping you from being there? It's, you know, and that's people. People are going to have these different experiences regardless of what they've come from. It's that thing of, fundamentally, all of us have almost got like this little compass or something innately that's like, I want to have this kind of a life. I want to have something, even if it is they have a really strong idea of what they absolutely do not want. They've got some idea. It's really helping them kind of make sense of, okay, so where are we going with this? But more importantly, why are we going with this?
Who influenced you? Because you sound like a wise person, like, and I know that. You sound like a very wise person. So I'm just thinking in answer to that, is like, who influenced your coaching style and the way that you think? Because that feels like, is that lots of reading, or is that lots of really wonderful people? You know, who influenced you to get to that space where you think the way that you think?
Definitely both. Certainly reading, you know, especially as a child, I could always be found in a book. But then definitely, I'd be lying if I said anything else. It's been a lot of people. Because I'm so curious, I could just see somebody. I'm that person that's at the bus stop and then ends up having conversations, and I'm finding out someone's life story. Like, you know, it starts off about the weather, and then it becomes this thing. But I think it's that bit of connecting to people and hearing so many stories. It starts to kind of fill in those gaps for me that I've always been curious about. Why do people say this and do that? And, you know, and so that part of me that is so curious and does the connection and everything else is filled by people all the time, by having those conversations. Or sometimes it's just the silent observing and trying to, like, in my head be curious and go, oh, I wonder what, you know. And it's the things that we do all the time without really thinking about it, whether it's people watching and all that sort of stuff. And then you're going, oh, and so when you actually get to connect to them and hear, and it's like, oh, what I thought was wrong. That makes me even more curious. It's all these bits of connecting to people. But I think even in reading, it's always someone's words fundamentally. If someone has taken the time to come and write this thing and to give an explanation as to their story, or, you know, a group of stories or whatever that case is. And it's like, for me, that's always been like, there's this other way of thinking about this, is this other thing. And what my parents gave me was always the encouragement to really just sit down, not before making a decision, before doing something. Have you thought about it, and why are you doing that? You know, or they'd give me a reason as to why I should be doing something, which I was like, but why? So I was like, I'm not going to do that. And they'd be like, okay, do your thing. And they'd allow me the freedom to do that. Even if what they felt was really strongly wrong, they still allowed me the space to do it. As long as they were alive and breathing, they were like, just do what you got to do. We're going to be here. And I've always had that.
That is amazing. And I think that's really quite powerful. And I think that's the approach I took with my daughter. If you want to be a singer, but do the research on singing. If you want to go to university, do the research on kind of going to university. Where do you want to go? I really believe in the fact, sort of, you know, what is your own journey? Even at the age of like 2, 3, and my sister used to laugh at me because I would put some clothes out, so I kind of selected. But what my daughter chose to wear was up to her. It looked really mad most of the time, to be quite honest. But I really passionately believed in choice, you know, having the choice. If as long as it's not harming yourself and others, having the freedom and choice to do what you want to do and how you want to do it. I know it comes from a place of privilege, but I do believe it should be a right.
100%. But then you know what? It's really interesting because I was that child who was so curious and always asking why. I think I don't even know if it's the balance, but I had two different spectrums of parenting. In my mum, it was very much from a place of fear. Don't do this, you should do it like this, you know, be quiet and be still and da, 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 da. And my dad was completely opposite. And so I guess I went into the world hugely curious, and initially I'd have like these moments of like really strong fear, but do it anyway, because let's go and see what happens. And it was, you know, it was, as a child, it would be small things, like I'd take something apart that I had no business taking apart just to see what it looks like, and then, you know, can I put it back together? But then I found my space in things like art, especially drawing. I started with painting and making things and everything else, but I found space in drawing. And again, everything I showed some curiosity or passion about, it was fostered, you know. But there's also something about, and I think this probably goes back, it's probably specific for most people coming from an ethnic minority. There's a bit about being resourceful and also being creative. If you don't have something, how do you go and find a way to either get it or make it happen? There's no space for failure, there's no space for no, just make it happen. How can we make this happen? And so that's very deeply ingrained in me. It's like, even if I haven't got a clue, and which is often the case, I do things because I want to. I decide I'm going to do something and I do it. I don't necessarily research it. I might find the research as I go along the way by doing. But it's never been a thing where I'm like, I have to, because I know that's something I respect in people I work with, definitely, because I am so gung-ho in my thinking. It's like, oh, I've got an idea, let's just do this, and I go and do it. I figure out along the way that actually there is a balance to be had, and maybe my mum's kind of thinking, but actually let's just slow down, let's think about this a little bit more. But I think because of that, I've always managed to feel quite confident, even if it's hard, just keep going. I'm
also mindful. I'm listening to you and we've had an opportunity. I had an opportunity to be an artist and felt that I was an artist, did that, breathed that, lived that. But I'm also mindful that a lot of my clients have to be lawyers, have to be doctors, have to be engineers, have to be certain things. This is the family script. This comes from our parents' ideas.
Yeah.
And maybe the parenting approach is quite strict, quite fear-based, or quite value-based. How do you kind of loosen them up so that they can kind of be open to the possibilities and not be scared to come out of that box without kind of affecting the way that they see the world?
I'd be lying if I said I don't affect the feel the world. That's exactly what I do.
So you just do get right in there.
I do, and you know, I think that's part of the thrill of doing that kind of work, is because, and I say that on purpose, because again, not people who come to me for parenting, people who have had that experience where, I don't want to say it's not been a choice, because I fundamentally believe we always have a choice, but I think again is that bit of it being very hardly instilled through strictness and, you know, you can name it, all sorts of things, when it feels like there's been no choice and so they've had to become the doctor, the lawyer and what have you. That is fundamentally those more likely who have done one or two things with that, is that they haven't managed to do that, and so there's this fear of failure and I don't know where my life's going and the midlife crisis type feeling, or they have done that and they come away at a certain part of their life having done all of those things feeling completely unsatisfied, and so they come through the door going, I feel stagnant, I feel like this, I've got this point in my career and I've got my family and and I feel stuck, I feel anxious, I feel stressed, I'm not sleeping and all these things. And then when you unpick it a little bit, it's that bit of they've lived a life not through choice.
So those that you're coming to see, or those who come to see you, they are kind of done the right thing by everyone else, and then they turn up and they say, actually, I'm flat, I'm spent, I really can't sleep, don't know what I'm doing, I'm dependent on drugs, or I'm really dependent on other people's ideas about myself, but I don't know who I am. How do you help them? How do you help those individuals?
Yeah.
How do you help those individuals that are stuck, that don't know what to do? They don't know how to put their foot forward. to go in the direction of their lives?
The first thing I should say is that's not always the case. There is that side, and then there's another side of clients who also have done all these things and they've almost become like an overachiever because that's the thing that's underpinned them. So I don't want to always say they feel stuck because they've gotten to this point and they've done everything and then that's the reason why. Sometimes they're overachieved as part of their
Is that a bad thing to overachieve, do you think, in some ways, for those type of clients? Because I think you're right. I think there are many clients out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose, I probably have met people who've gone up to do their PhD and really want to bake cakes.
Right. And, it's part of my own story. So I guess it's sharing that story, but it's less about me sharing mine as it is unraveling theirs, about where in your thinking, and it isn't much about their own thinking, their own beliefs, did it become a point where their lives then was dictated by this script, if you like? Because at that point, you think as parents, all of us do it, regardless of everything, regardless of what our beliefs and our value systems are. Fundamentally, we encourage our children to do success, whatever that looks like. So let's call it that, right? And you can say, okay, there is an element of that. But as we become adults and now we have the free will, despite the fact that, again, in some cultures or in some families, you could be 60 and your parents are telling you how to live your life. There comes a point where one or two things are going to happen. Either that's the life you really want to live and you're enjoying it and everything else, but then to come through the doors because they're not. And it's like, okay, as an adult, let's think about this together for a little moment. So we'll unravel some of that story, not some of it, all of it. We spend some time initially just unraveling, where did that come from? What was the purpose? Why did you live it out? Why are you still living it out? What impact has it had on you? And all those sorts of things. But then I put back to them, and that's the irony of being here with you. Being the reflective part is I then reflect back, this is what I've heard from you. I've heard for all of these reasons you've walked to this space, you've done this thing, you've achieved, you've become successful, and you've fundamentally wanted this. This is what I've heard from you. Or in some cases, which is often the case, you've done all of this because that's the thing you were guided to, instructed to, and what have you. And now you've got no idea what you want.
Absolutely. Or that you have your parents who don't know what it means to work in your industry, directing you to do other things without actually understanding what a social media content builder is or manager is within there. And it's interesting because I wonder how much culture and value you place. I came from a working class family, in terms of origin. I think initially not many of us went to university. So the work ethic, if I would go and visit my grandma, the messaging would be go to work. It wouldn't be go to art school and daydream about art all day long. And right. The message was kind of work. Luckily, I had other influences to be able to direct me, but I can see why you can end up spending 5, 10, 20 years, 30 years not being the person that you want to be.
100%. And I think, for so many reasons that can fall into the case. Because even for myself, that wasn't my experience in terms of having a huge pressure to become something. Didn't have that. It was just to be successful in whatever it is. Do your education, get as much education as you can, and work really hard. But then it got to this point where I'm like, again, why? Because and it's a horrible thing to have to say, but that was genuinely my experience. I was working, and I have worked in scenarios where essentially I'm being managed to do my job by someone who hasn't got a clue about the part of my job that I do. And that's not to say a manager needs to know that, but for me, it became this wall or a ceiling or a barrier because there's some conversations I'm trying to have in my job that you can't connect to, So there's all sorts of things as to why the barriers can come up. And it might not necessarily because of, not having those things or not feeling able to or being structured by our parents or these other influences not to. There's just things in life where we make decisions for whatever our priority is at the time, where we can stay in a situation longer than we should. And that could be in our jobs, that could be in our marriages, that could be even in our parenting, it could be in so many facets, it be. But at some point, for most people, they go through a stage where it's like, this isn't working. And we feel stuck and we become stagnant and we lose parts of ourselves, we lose confidence and all sorts of things, you know, and having the space to think about, how did I end up here? Why did I get here?
I think that's a lovely, when you can get to that stage of how, you can then start unpack the why, the where, the what do I need. You can understand, you can unpack the resources, the opportunity, the constraints and the barriers.
Right.
But I also wonder, like, you know, society doesn't often give us examples of that represent ourselves or look like us as women or as maybe global majority or as just people with neurodivergence. You know, they give an example that often doesn't look like us as individuals, as human beings, as it were. Like, what made you decide to be a CEO? Because I can't imagine that you woke up one day and say, I'm going to be a founder or a CEO, or did you? Or what was it that got you to that place where you then had to say to yourself, this is what I need to do? Because it's not enough for me to kind of listen to what other people think I should do.
It was a number of things. For me, it was very much, I don't want this.
I don't want. So is that your
this?
I don't want this.
Yeah.
How long did you put up with this?
How long?
Yeah.
You know what? And this is why I'm being really, I'm trying to be really graceful and kind in terms of how I think about it, because I think in talking about it, sometimes it's that thing, I think we can miss so many things because everybody's experience is so unique. From my experience, I went through the best part of about a good solid 15 years of being able to be me in every shape I could in that organisation. So I would see something, see a gap, fill it, create a new job description, great. And then what happened for me was I had this, all the time I was doing that, I was a single parent with my one child. I got into a relationship and I went to have on my second, third and fourth children. And for me, it was really interesting because, as you can imagine, for any organisation, doesn't matter where you work, there's change that happens and what have you. For me, what happened in that journey was I was getting into probably my 15th year of being in that arena and literally just thriving, like creating new situations for myself and thriving in that. And I had training opportunities, you name it, everything I could potentially be, I could. And then I had my second child, went on maternity leave, came back, and things had changed significantly as an organisation. How I used to work, it was no longer even an option. But me being me, and I'm stubborn and I'm hard-headed and I'm all these things in myself, I was now like, okay, I'm hitting these walls. So I'm being me, I'm like, these walls don't exist, it's in my head. I'm just gonna, it's this limiting beliefs, I'm gonna do it. And then I had, not even a year later, I was on maternity leave again. Now, when I went to maternity leave, the now second time, it was really interesting because I'd been hitting all these walls and everything else, my confidence had dropped, and now I started looking at me like I'm the issue. But also, I'd given birth to my now, at that time, my oldest daughter, my first daughter. So then there was another school of thinking happening for me about what am I going to model to her? I'm going through a point up until having her of thinking, I used to be all these things and was able to go and do these things. And now I'm in a space of when I'm giving birth to her feeling like something's not quite fitting here. This doesn't feel right and all sorts of things. And then a couple of years later, after going back into work, and then it feels like these walls feel like they're essentially closing in, feeling even more so. And so now this is like, let's say it was a 20-something year career. This is about 17 years in. I'm still trying to figure out, is this a me thing? Do I need to shift? Or is this the organisation that I'm in? Or is it now because I'm a parent and now I've got two girls that are looking up at me? Like, there was lots of other thoughts coming in and influencing me. But I was really strongly in this mind of, I'm going to stick this out and I'm going to be that person who just pushes these barriers. And the more I push against them, the more they're hitting back at me. And that, it manifested itself at the time as being about, it was very subtle. It's like elements around institutionalized racism. There was bullying. There was rumours, there's all this kind of stuff happening in that arena, but outside of that arena, I'm like, is this me? And I'm really genuinely starting to believe this is a me thing. So now I'm like breaking down slower and slower and slower. And then I'm like, you know what? If it's you, fix it. Just fix it and carry on. And I did. But then it's like, I had the benefit of having some genuinely phenomenal people going, Sam, while you want to take accountability and responsibility, that's fundamentally who you are, there's some other stuff at play that's not okay. You can and you should get out, go and thrive and blah, blah, which is great. What I didn't have was the how. I didn't have the how, and I didn't know where to get the how. I didn't know how to get the what, the where, the anything. I had nothing. So I'm just becoming slowly going, okay, there's a plan, we're leaving, we're doing this, something's happening, and it's boiling in me. But all the time, I'm still trying to use the experience I'm in this organization to say, let's test some stuff out. So I'm now in management, and I'm using that as a management experience to say, okay, you've got a place of influence, you can learn this about management, you can learn about this. And I was really just throwing myself into all kinds of different training at this point, which is huge and it's massive, and it was a huge positive. I didn't experience it like that. I was just like, I need to do something. I felt like I was drowning. And then it was interesting. At the time I was like, okay, we're going to do the coaching thing. It's like, what is it? And that's when I had to really get in touch with me. What is it fundamentally I was doing? And the thing that had driven me all the time was not just, and I said it there even at the beginning of this, it was the why. What I'd always been doing that I hadn't recognized was I was helping other people to figure out the who, what, where, when, how.
But not applying it to yourself.
Not applying it to me. I was just doing, when necessarily without a plan. This is the first time in my life I was having to think of a plan, because now I've got these responsibilities of my 4 children. I'm now married, got mortgage and cars and all sorts of stuff to pay for. I can't just jump like I used to. I've got to do it in a planned way for the first time in my life. So I was like, okay. And just so happened for me, there was an opportunity through voluntary redundancy to say, okay, we got a little time to play with. And so I ran. I literally took the opportunity and I ran. And so I figured out the what by then. I went and got trained and I went and done the whole, retrained as a life coach. And that's where I learned to do the talk therapies and everything else alongside it, and just ran and did it. I figured it out. I went and got a little space, I rented it out, and I started getting clients in.
So it's interesting because it sounds like you got to a point where you're doing all the things to be part of an organisation, to fit into the model. The organisation is moving on and adapting, you're moving on and adapting or taking time out, and you come to a point where there's resistance, isn't it? There is a kind of like, I can't do it anymore. I don't, and I really recognise that. And I think most people get to a point where they've hit a brick wall. They've done everything they've tried to stay within the parameters, but actually you need to go over to the other side of the wall. And sometimes it's an opportunity like redundancy, instead of looking at it as a really, oh my God, this is the end of the world, actually this is an opportunity, to be able to take the world and do the things that you kind of hoped, and you use that opportunity and the space. But there's something also about listening to you in the way that you think. It sounds like you've got a growth mindset, that you're resilient, and that actually you won't suffer too long in discomfort before acting on it.
Yeah. And it's a really strange thing, because in being driven by this why, but not thinking about the hows and stuff as the detail part, and being driven in that way, but also having just made it through, it gave me this huge amount of confidence in myself that, you know what, regardless of everything, I can just make this happen. And I've always had that. Because even when things were bad, even if I thought things were really, really, really bad, I'm still here breathing, right? I can do another day, we can make a plan, there's something we can do. So I've always had that. But in that instance, I felt like this weight of responsibility now, being a parent of so many kids, you can't just be so willy-nilly about it, and then become self-reflective in a way that's making me think, yes, I'm climbing up these walls, but are these walls me? Is it me now creating these walls for myself? Is it now because the way I work in this space doesn't fit, and all sorts of stuff? And the message I was getting essentially was, yes, 100% do fix up and do this other thing. And I'm just like, no, it was genuinely no, I don't want this. I just don't want this. There's no parts of it. And the reality of it is, whether again it's work or any other part of our lives, when we are hitting those kinds of walls, when it's I don't want this, I don't want this, I don't want this as a wall, that in itself can be a huge driver. And
yes, and also is not to internalize it in some ways and blame yourself, because if they don't want it, you know, we all go out of fashion at some point. Yeah. It's deciding whether or not we have our trainers on to run to the next kind of opportunity. Absolutely. Or we can have our slippers on and just walk to the next opportunity, or we can just not wear anything. We can just lie down and let opportunity go past and not do anything.
And I was, put my hands up to it all, and that's why I probably can resonate to some of my clients in that regard, is that when in ourselves we don't have that confidence, we may never have had it, but in my case I lost it. It became for me, and it, at the time I was experiencing it, and I was looking outward and going, the problem's all there at some point. So I was like, this isn't a me, this is going on with them, and da 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 da. But it's always both and. It isn't a case of, and two things can be true. I can be experiencing this negativity in this arena, but also I'm also feeding into it in my own ways. And so even recognizing at the beginning of, I don't want this, in hindsight, I would say, okay, so go figure out what you do want. And I was trying so hard, I had no clue where to go with that.
And I think people, I wonder, and I don't want to make assumptions on people's life, but I wonder sometimes when we don't know that we can have an alternative thing, a path, duality, running at the same time. That actually can be, I don't want this, but I do want this. And they can actually exist in both spaces, creating cognitive dissonance and uncomfortability, and do it.
Yeah.
What do you think are the challenges then? How do we kind of invite people to think differently about their lives? Or how does coaching, compared to other models, help someone move forward when they are in that kind of crossroads at the bus stop, wanting to get on the bus, but maybe allowing lots of buses to go past them?
I think that's part of the thing. Like, I'm entirely guilty of, even when I feel confident, I have to go through these periods of like hitting these walls to be able to grow from. I'm entirely that person. I think I thrive in that space of being able to say, you know what, let me push this as far as it can go. And then when it's about to burst and break, that's when I'll move, because then I'm going to move like full pelt. And that was definitely the case then. So, and that's been the case with me. And again, hindsight's taught me that, but I thrive in that space. It's like when I hit lots of no's and when I hit a barrier, I'm like, okay, this is the energy I need to thrive me through. So in that period, I become quite negative and all these other things, but it's also that energy that then makes me go, okay, here we go. And I thrust at that point.
And I think that's to do with growth, isn't it? Because I think you have to, and why post-traumatic stress, the growth after trauma is so successful. I think I really wholeheartedly believe in what you just said, that actually I'm not inviting people to have shit lives, but I am recognizing that you don't have to be a survivor, that there is an option to thrive, regardless how the starts. I know that in my own storytelling, that actually I didn't have a good start. I didn't have good experiences. Maybe an insecure attachment makes me want to overachieve, but actually you can survive and grow. And sometimes we need to have some discomfort, but I do wonder if people want to be in those spaces, because it's not nice.
It's not nice, but unless I say this, it's like I was having this conversation in my own head this morning about, there's this cliche saying about we're not a tree move. But if you feel like you're in a forest and your trees are so entangled and deeply rooted and you don't see there's a space because there's all these other things around you, moving doesn't really feel like an option, especially if you can't imagine that there's somewhere else to go.
But I also know that there are certain trees, very rare, that actually move. They actually pick themselves up and go for a walk. Yeah, and that is in our own frame of reference in the world. Absolutely.
And so to answer your question in terms of the invitation, I guess my role in that space is to say, okay, you know what, I get it. This forest exists. you're deeply rooted down, and I can see this all these things that, you know, encompassing you in doing this thing. My invitation then becomes, if we could find you a field just of your own to create as you want, and you put whatever trees you want to in there, are you willing to do that? Because that's the first part of the things. Like, we can say all sorts of things as coaches, but the fundamental bit is first the connection and understanding what led to this and all that kind of stuff. But are you willing to do this journey and know that I'm going to go on it with you? And that's my invitation.
What keeps you going as a coach, you know, as an organisation, as a centre? What keeps you thriving? What is it that you're hoping to get through your work as a CEO and founder, but as a leader? And what are you hoping for the nation? Because I know that you work extensively in the Southeast, and I can imagine you kind of moving your trees down the country.
Yeah. What keeps it? I think, no, I take that back. 100% no. I thrive the best on watching that journey. I thrive on it. Like, it gives me, there's nothing else that gives me like the thrive of life, the breath of life, all of that stuff that makes us feel amazing as people. I get that from assisting people in that journey.
What's your vision then? What is your vision for us being based in the UK or in the world? Your children are going to grow up in the world, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. You know, what is it that you want your community to get from knowing you and get from the ideas that you have about life?
It's a very deep question, and I love it. I think from my school of thought, and I say it like that because for anyone who ever worked with me, they'll probably come to that understanding. I think just the fact that we're all alive and here, there's something we're meant to do in this world. And if I can be part of the journey to help figure out what that is, even if it is the thing you're not going to do for the rest of your life, it might be just the next step even in life, then that's what I'm here for. But in terms of a community, that understanding that all of that works based on whatever it is we're gifted with is to help serve other people. This is the way I specifically do it. And when we all figure out what our goal, what our dream, what our thing is, and we start working more into that space, we start connecting around and attracting more of the people we need to be around to make more of those things happen. I have no idea what the end part is going to look like for anybody, including myself. I just know that that's why I'm here. So helping other people make those connections is what keeps the centre going, because that's all we do. You know, that's all we do, is whether it's through painting, whether it's through coaching, whether it's through therapies, is having that part of the conversation. Like, where, yes, we don't like, you know, where you're right now, there's this other thing that's going to help discover that. Let's start making that bit happen. And so having worked freelance and having, you know, all these lovely opportunities we've had and all the other organisations we worked with is what the centre thrives on, is making those connections, not just with the organisations, but the people within them, because again, that's what makes an organisation work, that we then infiltrate them, and I say it like that too, on purpose, that ultimately we're all getting to somewhere, let's get there together. And that's what our offering is to the community, is that we should, and that's why we're here, so let's do it.
Where can we find you?
You can find me in person in Chiswick. We've got a lovely practice up there. Online, you can find me at LinkedIn. Literally type in my name and I will appear with my smile. And on Instagram, I'm life_coach_Sam.
Thank you, Sam Abraham, for being curious with me. I have thoroughly enjoyed listening to you today. I thoroughly endorse anyone to find you. I think you're an amazing practitioner. And the fact that, you know, I have seen you grow over the last 20 years, and that you can be found, you know, right across the Southeast. I think parents who have, those thousands of parents who have worked with you, have really been blessed and given an opportunity to be held by you and your team. But for those of us who are based in other parts of the world, can we still work with you? Do you have online stuff?
You just took the words out of my mouth. I have everything that we do in person, we do online. in addition to that, we also train people in a number of things that essentially is working with people too. So you can find me at www.samstoodstill.com.
Thank you, Sam.